Hello, welcome to the Craft House Magic Set of Tutorials. My name's Ellie and today I'm going to show you how I make up my advent calendar panels. This panel is from a shop called You Me Mabel and I shall leave a link down below, and the actual panel itself is called Advent 1346 by Sally Payne for Dashwood Studio, but I'll leave a link down below for where I got that from. So to do this you'll need some material for the backing of the panel, but also enough material to do the back of all the doors to the advent calendar as well. So here I think I probably need about 1 metre because we're going to bind it in the same material. You could bind it in a different material if you wanted and use scraps that you have lying around. So you'll need a standard sewing machine, needles and thread. So I'd recommend the Smetz microtex needles, and I quite like the Superior Threads King Tut, and I've got a nice cream to match my fabric. Some quilting pins which are a little bit bent. You can use normal pins because it's only a small area. Pair of scissors, some wadding, so you'll need enough wadding to do the back of your panel and then also to go inside your doors as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is cut out my panel. Let's get this out of the way. So I'm going to cut out this panel up to the red line because that's where the edge of the panel meets, and these windows I'm actually going to cut out in strips. So I'll get on with cutting out my strips and then I'll show you how I get on to the next step. So there we are, I've cut out the panel that you mount the pockets on as well as the pockets. For this particular panel the pockets are actually in strips here, so I'm going to do this slightly different to what I normally do. I'd actually normally treat each pocket individually, but I'm going to do the strip all at once. So the instructions to the advent calendar say about just folding over the seam allowance at the top, stitching it down, forming a box pleat there, folding up the seam allowance at the bottom and basically just mounting it straight onto there with raw seams. And I don't like the idea of raw seams, so I'm going to pad my pockets. So first thing I've done differently is that I've cut my pocket strips 1/4 inch from the edge all the way around, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to fold in my pockets here and I'm going to stitch along where the print is so that I've got no gaps between those pockets, so that when I actually make a quilted strip it'll fit nicely into there. That'll make more sense later. So I'm going to go now and stitch along all these seams to join them together so that they'll make one straight piece without the gaps in the middle. So I've just stitched between those panels so that they actually join together, so when you line it up with the sort of mounting panel they'll line up perfectly. So what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to trim these seams on the inside 1/4 inch from the stitch line and press them open so that it'll be nice and neat on the inside. So I shall go and do that and I'll come back in a second. So I want to press these seams open at the back just to prevent bulk. So what I'll do is I'll just smooth out the fabric so that the seam line is here, and I'm just going to set the seam by pressing that here like so, and then I'll open. So the seam is now pushed to this side. I will then press, I'm pressing it rather than ironing it, to one side, and then I'll finger press open the seam, being careful not to burn myself if you've just used a hot iron. So when you're doing quilting like this you don't use steam at all. So there we are, I'll press open the seams like that all the way along. So the pocket piece is nicely pressed, and then I've used this as a template to cut out a piece of wadding and a piece of backing fabric. This wadding is 100% cotton. I'm going to use 100% cotton for the whole of mine, but whichever wadding that you prefer. So I'm going to place my pocket front piece over the top of the wadding, And at this point you can actually do some quilting if you want to, around the hedgehog or whatever little symbol that you've got. So I'm going to do a little bit of quilting now, where I've just got literally the cotton batting and the front panel of the pockets. And once I've done that, I'll come back and show you, and we can go to the next stage where we're actually going to finish off the pocket panel. So I've quilted around the different shapes, like around the bear and around the little robin, as well as some of the numbers as well. So you can see that I've quilted all of those 5 little windows. What I'm now going to do is put right sides together with some material for the backing. I'm going to pin that into place. And I'm following the edge of the material rather than the wadding. The wadding is sticking out a little bit, but it doesn't matter. There we go. So this is the bottom edge of the window, so I'm going to leave a gap about that wide at the bottom. I'll start stitching here, do 1/4 of an inch all the way around and stop here so that I can turn it the right way through this hole here. So there we are, I've stitched all the way around. And then I turned it over, and I've just trimmed the wadding back to the stitch line so it doesn't give too much bulk. And what I'm going to do is just take a little bit off the corners, but don't cut into the stitch line, just so that there's less bulk on the corners. I've used some duckbill scissors here when I was trimming the wadding off, just to make it a little bit easier, so you're less likely to cut into the other layers of fabric. So you're only trimmed back the wadding rather than the rest of the 2 layers of cotton. So then I'm going to pull this the right way. I'm going to use a pokey tool. I've got one of these, just to poke the corners out nice and neatly. Poke that last corner out. I'm going to finger press that nice and neat, and then when you've got this little gap here where you've left it open to turn it the right way, I'd finger press the fabric so that it's nice and neat, and then I'll just take this over to the ironing board and give it a light press just to make sure that the back is nice and neat. So I've pressed that, not too much so that it would sort of affect the quilting that I've done on the front, but that's all pressed. So you've still got a gap in the bottom that will be stitched up when you stitch that to the main part of your calendar. So I'm just going to get the main part of the calendar now. So I've taken the fabric that forms the mounting fabric for the calendar, and I've cut a piece of cream cotton for the background, for the backing. You can use any sort of fabric you've got. If you wanted to use a Christmas theme, you could use that as well, but as mine's going to be facing the wall, I just thought I'd keep it cream. I've cut my piece of wadding to fit, and I've layered those up. I've made sure that my backing fabric and my wadding are larger than my actual panel. So I'm now going to pin this all over. I have got a separate tutorial on how to pin and layer your quilt, which you might want to follow, but because this is a smaller piece, I just laid it on the table instead of using masking tape. Layered each layer carefully one by one and made sure that there was no wrinkles. But I'll just pin that now and show you how it looks. So I've now pinned the layers together. What I'm going to do before we apply the pockets is stitch around the edge of this line, just like a normal quilting stitch, about 3mm stitch using my walking foot just to hold the layers together before we apply the pockets. So the instructions actually say to apply the pockets before you start quilting the 3 layers together, but I like the idea of having the quilted pockets quilted into all of the layers so that it makes it stronger. So I'm going to pin these pockets into these boxed areas, and I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge on the side here all the way along the bottom and up the other side, and in the divisions between the pockets there. So there we are, I've stitched the pockets onto the mounting fabric and stitched between here. So then you've got nice squishy pockets with a nice quilted texture. What I'm going to do is do the same for all of the other rows, and then I'll do another tutorial where I show you how to do the binding of the wall hanging. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget there's going to be a sew along on Instagram for the advent calendars from the 1st to the 14th of November 2018. We can see what each other's been sewing. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye!